Hello and welcome to our series of podcasts around leadership. I'm delighted today to be joined by Dr. Judith Curson, who's held a range of positions in NHS leadership over the years. I was just reflecting, Judy, when I was preparing for this, that it must be 30 years ago that we met each other when you were a young public health consultant and I was a very young chief executive. So, yes, time flies, doesn't it?
Mm.
So you've had an interesting and broad career. So I wondered if you might be able to tell us a little bit about your career pathway.
Yes, so it started out as very standard. I went straight from school to university to study medicine, and did, the jobs in hospital and general practice. Then I specialised in public health and became a consultant and then a director of public health, which is when we knew each other and worked together. And I was on the board of a health authority for about 8 years. And then I decided I didn't want to do it for the rest of my career. Not quite sure what it was that I didn't want to do. Since then, I've had a much more eclectic career, and I'm now in my third period of self-employment. But in between, I've done various jobs in medical or public health education and workforce development, a couple of big leadership roles in workforce planning, one across all the healthcare professions, and one focused very much on public health. I'm now in a very happy position of working independently and taking on the work I enjoy most. So I'm focusing on professional appraisal, coaching and mentoring and workforce development. So I'm really supporting today's leaders, if you like.
So would you say that you had a plan when you embarked on this, or did it kind of evolve naturally for you?
I think the plan varied quite a lot.
Okay.
At one point, I wanted to be a radiologist, and then I realised that most of the radiologists worked in the basement, and I like sunlight and fresh air. I certainly, when I went into public health, I had a plan that I wanted to be a director of public health, and then I hadn't thought beyond that. And I think that probably is one of the important things, is that your career lasts a long time, and you are going to change your mind about what you like doing and what you want to do at different ages and stages. And you can't assume that, particularly nowadays, you can't assume that you're going to be in the same job or career for a long time.
No, it's quite interesting. It has changed, hasn't it? Quite a lot. A number of people who attend our Finding the Leader Within course have started from a place where they think that you decide on the direction of your career and that's the way it continues. But actually, as most of us now know, it evolves and changes and does double turns and all sorts of things, doesn't it? So
sometimes you're in control of that change, and other times it almost becomes thrust upon you because of a reorganization or a change in direction, that kind of steers you towards doing something else or going from a different starting point.
Yeah, I think that's quite important actually, because the NHS in particular does lots of reorganising, doesn't it? And I don't know about you, but some of the opportunities that were foisted upon me were actually things I would never have considered, and yet actually helped my career develop in new and different ways. Did something like that happen with you?
Yes, I've had very similar. So I've had 3 quite big acting roles because of illness in other people, and probably jobs that I wouldn't have applied for or tackled. But actually, I've learned a tremendous amount from doing them. So I think it is, as you say, things happen, and you just have to make the most of those opportunities.
Yes, I absolutely agree. So, how would you actually describe your leadership style?
Well, I suppose as a team leader of a team, my preferences are to set clear expectations and just let people get on with it, with regular check-ins. And I can be more directive if needed, especially for less experienced or poorly performing staff. But that's definitely my preference. and I try to keep the team informed while filtering a lot of the stuff that comes down from on high. So I try not to just pass that on. It just, it gets filtered. I mean, as a leader in a system, I try to get buy-in for the direction of travel, and trying to work with the willing to get there. I mean, you eventually have to bring some of the unwilling on board, but it helps if you're working with the willing to start with. I've got a big thing about trying not to get bogged down in too many meetings, which I think is one of the big issues of the NHS. And I like them to be tightly chaired and, are a way of doing business, not just a regular. I network in line with my leadership, with my preference for introversion, which we'll probably talk about later on. So it's very much one-to-one. So building relationships one-to-one. Both as a team leader and a system leader, I've got a very strong developmental focus. So I encourage and support people to stretch themselves, and also to take credit for their own work. So if they've worked on something, I get them to present it. I'm got a bit of a reputation for being the person who has the difficult conversations. I had some feedback once that was, I tackled head on the gnarly things. So, and I can give difficult feedback. I try to be clear, but also as kind as possible, because I think you can give difficult feedback without being, there's no need to be nasty to people. It's all in support of their development. What else? I have a sense of humour, and that's helpful at times. And I can be very pragmatic about, well, what will work, rather than being too, oh, this is the way to do it.
Yeah, I think that's very, very helpful for people to think through. There's a couple of things that you raised there that I think might be worthy of a bit more exploration. The one that comes up many, many times in my coaching and the leadership courses we run is how to have those difficult questions, because a lot of the time, or difficult conversations, a lot of the time people are afraid. So what might be some of the wisdom you could impart or share with these people about how you can do it in a way, as you said, kindly, but still get the message across and help the person not be so afraid of having to have that conversation?
I think it helps that I have a very strong sense of, it isn't my job to make you like me. I'd like you to respect me, but at the end of the day, we have to get the job done, and it has to be done well. And if things aren't going well, then other people in the team are disturbed by that as well, or in the system are struggling with that as well. So I'm not just doing it kind of for me, or this isn't because you irritate me. This is because it's not working, and we have to see what we can do to make it work. So I guess understand, being clear about my motivation and my intent, to use a coaching term, in having that conversation is really helpful. But I know it is harder for people who have a much deeper need to be liked. As I say, I'd like you to respect me, but if you don't like me, well, I can live with that. I have other people in my life who do. So.
Okay, that's really helpful. And the other bit was about being an introvert, because there's an assumption that you have to be an out-and-out extrovert to be able to lead people and groups. So it would be helpful if you could if we could explore that a little bit, and if you could explain how you've navigated that assumption.
Yeah, okay. Well, I did, the usual Myers-Briggs things several times. Sometimes people were surprised that I was an introvert, because I do speak up in meetings, and can think fairly fast on my feet in question and answer. But I think about the second or third time I did it, I finally began to dawn what introversion meant for me, and about being where I get my energy. And it's not that I'm hopeless, that I somehow can't manage to stay up in the bar all evening talking to people about work. Actually, I need the downtime, because I need to recharge. So that's been really helpful in learning to manage my energy. to appreciate that the best way for me to get more out of other people is not necessarily to convene a big meeting and become all charismatic, but to pick people off one-to-one, because that's how I network.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been really helpful. I also had an opportunity to do a piece of research on introverted leaders, working with Cassie Taylor from the Welsh Government, that was funded from what is now, after many iterations, the NHS Leadership Academy. And in fact, we're just revamping the website, but we interviewed lots of introverted leaders, many at quite senior positions in the NHS. And I think generally people tend to say, oh, I wish I'd worked it out earlier on why I was different. One of the things that I try to do for those introverts who do find it difficult to kind of really think quickly and then speak up in meetings is to get the extroverts to allow for that. And there are tricks like saying, right, Linda, I'm going to come to you in a minute, but I just want to say X, Y, Z. And then Linda, I know you're not an introvert, but Linda has been cued to think, right, I'm going to say something, and has time to think through what she wants to say. One of the introverts in the study that we did described a boss getting to the end of a meeting, and then when he opened his mouth, boss said, "Oh, thank goodness for that. I thought you were never going to speak." But he hadn't tried to prompt him and support him to speak. So it's really important that we work with extroverts to help get the best out of each other.
I find it fascinating, because actually I am an introvert, but I've managed to mask it so well for so long. But as I've got older, I allow myself more time and to actually do the things I need to do, like go for a walk in the garden or just get away for a while, just to, as you say, get the energy back. And I think there's some really important learning from that research you've done, I'm sure, because it doesn't mean to say that there's something wrong with us because we don't automatically extrovert or make a lot of noise in meetings. It's because we process things so very differently.
Yeah. And I think, since I started my career, there's been a lot more written about introversion and the power of the introvert. So there's much more literature you can refer to now. And I've got a group on LinkedIn which has got some introverts on it as well, or specifically for introverts. So I think people do try and understand it better. But there is still a kind of a bit of a negative connotation about being introverted, because people interpret it as antisocial or
yes,
not wanting to be with people. And so the narrow way in which it's used in Myers-Briggs is quite different from what people say.
yes.
when the man on the Clapham omnibus has quite a different view of what that means. And I think people try and pretend they're not introverts because of that kind of negative stigma.
Yeah, absolutely. So, given all of that, what would you say have been some of your standout defining moments, and what have they actually given you?
Okay, so one quite difficult time. I'd just come back to work after my father died, expecting to kind of just gently ease myself back into work. And my immediate boss was quite seriously ill. So I was asked to take on an acting role as Director of HR and Workforce for the newly formed Strategic Health Authority. You can tell that's quite a long time ago. There were some major work challenges, including reorganising everybody, taking money out of education and training, which is dear to my heart. So I didn't particularly want to do that anyway. And there were, to have a sort of leadership team under me for that function, there were 5 different teams that were coming together, and they all had completely different structures, and we hadn't done the restructuring. So I just said, right, we've got a job to do. I think I just sent an email around in the end, actually, because we only had email or face-to-face. There was none of this convening people quickly on a virtual meeting at that time. And said, if you think you should be on the leadership team for HR and workforce, then come to a meeting. I said, and if you come to the meeting, I'll be expecting you to do work. And it was interesting how the first meeting, there were a lot of people, but they soon self-selected, and we ended up with a leadership team with no actual formal structure or hierarchy. And that, I thought that was really, it shows what people can do without the formal structures, and if you're just clear what you want them to do, and try and work with people. So that was quite powerful learning for me. As I say, it's not a job I would have done otherwise.
No.
I mean, I'm not qualified in HR for a start, but I had people who could do that bit. I suppose another defining moment was almost the opposite way. I had to step up for COVID like everybody else, and I had got to a stage in my career where I'd done retire and return. I was down at 30 hours a week, doing a job I could manage, and suddenly it went up to 60. I was working with much more senior people within PHE and then UK HSA. I felt a bit like Icarus. I was getting a bit too close to the sun to be safe. And found I was just turning my hand to whatever was needed. So, for example, at one point I did the guidelines for staff for COVID in the workplace. And it's not that I had particular skills. It was the person who asked me to do it said it was because I'd be quite pragmatic. They needed it done quite quickly. I had to work with experts who knew the detail of every little thing of what was safer than something else. There was a wide range of staff in different jobs in PHE. So I managed to get it done in quite a short time scale, taking advice, not putting anything that would embarrass PHE if it appeared on the front page of the Daily Mail. And again, that was the kind of, I can get things done, and they don't necessarily need to be in my specialist expert field. But I think the biggest kind of learning for me from that point was, I realized I could still work at that pace, 60-hour weeks. I could still deliver results, but I realized I didn't want to anymore. And although it took me a while to kind of extricate myself, I am now at the point where I'm doing what I want to do. And I'm, I've got a different balance to my work and life. And every so often I see a job and I think, oh, I could do that. And I have to think back to what did it feel like. So no greedy jobs for me anymore. I've done my share of greedy jobs.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? It's that pull about, do I really want to go through all of that, or is it best for me to step aside and do it through third parties, through coaching and mentoring, which I'm sure gives you immense satisfaction as well. So what drew you to the health service in the first place?
Well, initially I'd done projects at school on Alexander Fleming, who discovered penicillin, and Albert Schweitzer, who was many things, but also a medical missionary almost. And so that was the initial attraction. But in fact, I've done very little research. And I've only done 2 very short trips to other countries. So I didn't really follow in their footsteps. But as I went through school, I realized I definitely wanted jobs working with people, with lots of people from, a wide range of backgrounds. And medicine seemed to offer that and lots of options for later on. And what I realized, of course, is that my options have been even wider than I could possibly have imagined, when I was at school thinking I want to be a doctor.
Yes, career development at school has had, certainly in my time, has a lot to answer for, I think, in pushing people down certain channels, but it was the best they could do at the time, I think. So What do you think are the most important qualities in a leader, and who has really inspired you?
Hmm. I don't think I want to give names of who's inspired me, but I can tell you in case I miss somebody out and they're offended. But the people who've inspired me are people who had a sense of purpose or mission. You know, they weren't there just to push their career.
Mm.
They were actually there because they wanted to achieve something for people. Who can be very clear about their objectives and priorities. I find lack of clarity very difficult. Who have strong networks they could use and leverage. But importantly, I think the two things are really important: that they genuinely care about the people they're leading, whether that's, you know, directly underneath them or in the wider system. And they actually deliver things. They actually make things happen.
Okay, so having said that, are there two or three key things in a leader that you say that you would think are the most important? You mentioned clarity and caring for the people, but is there something else too?
No, I think if I was asked to name one thing, it's that sense of purpose or mission, that they really know that they want to change things or make a difference, as opposed to they just want to climb the ladder or the greasy pole.
Absolutely. So do you think women lead differently from men, or do you think that's a bit of a smokescreen?
Um, I think the trouble is there's so much variation between how
Mm.
people lead. It'd be difficult to say. Oh no, I haven't sort of researched it, but oh yes, women lead systematically differently from men. Um, I would imagine that if you could draw the two normal distributions or the bell curves for both of them, they would overlap a lot, but there would be some differences at the ends. I think there is some evidence that women need to believe that they can do more. Like when they apply for a job, if they don't meet 100% of the person spec, they'll be put off applying, whereas men will say, oh, I could do 60% of that, that'll be fine. So I suspect, but I don't know, I don't have any evidence, that we possibly behave like that towards leadership roles, particularly some of the ones where you don't have to apply for a job as such, but you know, what do you step up for your professional body, or do you take something on as a project? So I suspect there probably are some differences, but I think the differences between individuals are so great that obscures it.
Yes,
I'd like to think,
it's quite complex, isn't it?
yes.
So what have you found the most difficult thing to do in your career, and how did you overcome it?
I think probably one of the most difficult things, you mentioned it earlier, is supporting other people through organizational change.
Mm.
And particularly early in my career, I found myself supporting senior people who I thought probably weren't going to get the job anyway, you know, or were going to be out on their ear kind of thing. But the hardest I had was when I think, you know, I ran the NHS workforce review team for a few years, and it was kind of my baby. I'd built it up from me and the secretary to, you know, a team of 40 people. We had a multi-million-pound budget, and we were advising the Department of Health and the NHS across all the health professions on workforce planning. And it was decided to outsource it to the private sector. So it was a big change program, and although I'd handled reorganisations within the NHS, this was different because people would be going out to the private sector, so that raised different issues. There was less understanding of some of the people we were working with about, for example, how NHS pensions worked, and how redundancy how redundancy works, so that in the NHS your total service is counted rather than the time you've been in X hospital or Y hospital. So we worked with several of the bidders. I followed my motto, which is if in doubt, carry on, and really pushed the team to keep working, not the sort of reorganization blight you can get. We kept working, we kept delivering, we kept selling our services across the NHS, and kept offering training and development opportunities. If we can't offer people security, at least offer them, what's the saying? To be employed is to be insecure, but to be employable is to be secure. So lots of training courses, lots of development, lots of opportunities to try different things, and at the same time trying to think about my own position, but without letting that cloud things. I remember one particularly bizarre conversation with one of the bidders for the work about how much they should put in their bid for the cost of making me redundant, because that's what they were going to do. That didn't happen. And I did have an opportunity to leave early in that process because there was a job that would have suited me nicely that came up, but I decided to stay to the end with the team. I can remember one of the times when I was talking to him, because the thing is obviously to keep communicating, keep telling people what you know. As I said, keep filtering some of the stuff that was coming from, or some of the questions that were coming from the bidders. But when I was talking to the team, I was saying, and this is what I'm going to do, because I negotiated a kind of compromise way out of nobody having to make me redundant, and say a great saving to the public purse. And I remember saying, and this is what I'm going to do. And my son was doing GCSEs that year. And I said, I'm also hoping to get through his GCSEs without either of us killing each other, which was quite a challenge too. So I suppose in summary, it is the trying to think about other people while you're kind of, I suppose, almost grieving, for giving up. And then I've known other people in similar positions. Once you've been organised 2 or 3 times, some people are a long way from where the original organisation was. So even in that Strategic Health Authority option I talked about, there were a couple of people who really loved their jobs, but their job had just moved so far from where they lived that they had to accept that they couldn't possibly realistically do it anymore. And I think that's very sad.
Yeah, yes, it is. And that's what reorganisations do, unfortunately, don't they? From time to time. So what would you like to be remembered for?
Well, I'd like to say there was some kind of big public health change that I'd improved the health of the population. But I think the reality is it will be much more about the differences I've helped make for individual people along the way. Some of whom will be people who work directly to me, but actually other people in the system or people I've helped through mentoring and coaching often come back years later and say, I often think, what would Judy say?
That's wonderful. That's wonderful when that happens.
That's the thing, yeah.
So as we kind of wind up our conversation, what would be a key piece of advice you give to somebody embarking on an NHS career right now?
Well, I think there's a lovely quote that's from someone not in the NHS, but actually she's called Stacey Kennedy, who said, "Stay humble, keep learning, and set your grit meter to continuous change," which I think is lovely.
That's wonderful.
I would add to that, however, remember the values that brought you there in the first place, and keep sighted on those. And the last one is be kind to others and also to yourself, because it is a highly complex system, and it has a lot of challenges working in it.
I think that's really powerful because people very often forget to be kind to themselves. So that's a really helpful reminder. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed talking to you today. And I wish you well with your next steps.
Thank you very much.